It was very much a part of life from the time we were about 8, each of us. And I remember the irrigation. Dad would put burlap sacks over the surface pipe, which were 5-inch surface pipes. And I think there were 3 outlets on every one, and he'd go along with his jigger, which is simply a little tool where he could tap them closed or open more. And it was my job to put the burlap sack over and a couple shovelfuls of dirt so that the sack didn't go with the water. And that kept it from driving a big hole in the dirt, making a great big hole in the dirt, and kept it, flowing and going on down the furrow to water the bean row. So that was one of the things. And then that 37 Chevy pickup, which we called Tin Lizzie. That's how I learned to drive. Because when you went along really, really slowly, somebody could be taking surface pipe out at the back and setting them along ready to be put together. And so I learned to drive because it was really slow and you only had to go in low gear. So that was my learning to drive.
How old were you when you learned to drive?
Oh, I don't know, probably 10.
Oh, goodness.
And then a little later, I would come home from school, and by then I was probably, I don't know, 3rd, 4th grade. And I had a rock collection because we did that at school.
Mr. Holberger's Rock
Holberger's
Club.
Rock Club.
That's an old Salinas name.
So I'd come home from school and Dad would need me to ride on the planter because when they plant, they want the rows to be straight, right? And Dad prided himself in having very straight rows.
Straight.
So I'd come home from school and he'd say, come on. So I would get on the planter. Well, can you imagine how boring that is? Riding the planter just so that you can turn there's an arm out this way going that way, and then you go to turn the tractor and go the other way, and then there's an arm. When that was my job, change the arm on the planter so the rows were straight. So I would sit out there bored, but I would memorize all the rocks that I owned. So I knew all my rocks from Mr. Holberger.
Right, and what I remember, one of my first jobs in the field too, besides shocking hay, because that was probably only one part of the season, but sometimes in the spring, Dad would plow the field with the tractor, and that was to improve the crop, and I'm sure it did improve the crop that year, but it brought up a problem, and that was rocks, field rocks, out on 801 Road, 801 Williams Road, and so then there were too many rocks for the crop. So we kids were each given a bucket, and we went out to walk up and down through the fields and to pick up rocks. Well, once the bucket got heavier, we were dragging the bucket, and I remember we had some drop spots, maybe by a irrigation hydrant or the end of a row, or I'm not quite sure how we did that because, I don't know, we were 8, 9, or 10, or 11, and not real strong yet, but we helped, and we really learned the meaning of what it means to help and to help get the crop planted. I got to think, I was younger, so I think I only got to do the bean planting, moving of the arm maybe once or twice. And but we all learned to help, and we learned to work together. I mean, when I was teaching school, we had this term, we got to teach the children to be cooperative learners. Well, we learned that right at home, working together, and from sunup to sundown sometimes, getting those crops irrigated, and then harvest time, we had the pitchforks out again. I think Dad knew that as we got bigger, he had more jobs for us, so he probably bought those pitchforks.
Or the shovels.
And the shovel, Dad might have made the pitchforks. He was a welder, and so he would create things in his shop. But anyway, the tools were there, and it was October, harvest time, right? So this time of year, Dad would go out when it was foggy, I think, and cut the beans. So they didn't pop out of the shell. You want the dry beans in the shell to stay in there
Until harvest.
till harvest. So he'd go out and cut the bean fields, but then the next step in the process was to rake the beans, probably on the fog again. But in order to get the tractor around the ends of the rows, those rows of first the small cut beans needed to be, I'm going to say, folded back or moved back so there was room for the tractor to come around the end.
With the harvester later.
Yeah, later on with the harvester. So we had,
stragglers at the end.
for 100 acres, you know, that was quite a few rows.
That was.
And so the three of us kids, we were the workers. We got out there and moved those beans back so Dad could get around with a harvester. And then probably late October, probably is when the harvesting happened. You know, we're going to drive around the valley this afternoon, and I don't know if anybody still raises small white beans here, but that was Mom and Dad's crop.
And Paul, our brother, will certainly, when he is able
Yes.
to participate, hopefully, in the future, you know, can fill you in with better farming lingo, agriculture lingo than either my sister or
Yeah.
I can, that's for sure.
Well, did you pretty much just stay on the farm when you weren't in school and work, or did you have friends?
We basically saw our friends at school and at church. We did go to church, going back to Grandpa T.C. Closter. When he came here, he took his family to the Danish Lutheran Church, which was natural. And then he kind of woke up to the fact one day that, you know, I'm raising my family here and we're Americans now, and English is the language they speak in this country, so, you know, maybe as much as we like the Danish Lutheran Church and our friends here, I should take my family to a church where they speak English so that my kids and my wife learn English and myself. And so he made a tough decision, I think, and went and started attending a church where English was spoken, so they'd have that exposure. So anyway, church was big in our family. We went every Sunday morning, Sunday school and church faithfully. Mother was later involved in a youth group for us, and in fact, she and Dad had met in youth group. That's how she and Daddy met.
I meant to ask that.
Yeah.
What church did?
United Presbyterian. The first one on Paro Street. Now, of course, it's over on Romy Lane. No. Yes.
Romy Lane.
Right. So, yes. So, long history in that church.
So that was a real social occasion.
That was kind of our social connection. And then I was in Campfire Girls. I think Aunt Dorothy encouraged that. I don't know if you were.
No, I wasn't.
And then 4-H. I was in 4-H, and I think you and Paul were both in 4-H also. So that was a good connection.
But I think when we were young, at least for myself, until we were about 12, at least in my case 12, and I think Paul too, because he's just a year younger than me, we were pretty well at home.
Yeah.
We were very much, I can remember, yeah, we played together, Paul and I played with you some. You were the older one and more mature, and you had your books.
Exploring and reading books, and yep.
Yeah, and but we didn't come to town for soccer or, you know, anything like families do now. We were pretty well, we had to entertain ourselves, and we learned to play with each other or even by ourselves.
Outdoors a lot. Played outdoors just a lot.
All the time.
All the time. It's hard to get us in to eat a meal. You know, if we didn't have homework or chores, we were playing outdoors.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd get kites flying before dinner and tie them up and hope they'd still be flying after dinner. I mean, just climbing trees, you know, down exploring the slough. I mean, we never lacked for fun things to do. Great way to develop an imagination.
I remember one game, we played. It might have just been Paul and I, but when it got dark early, so it must have been like maybe December, January when it wasn't raining, on the new house on Williams Road, we'd go out and we'd prop up a flashlight against the wall, so we had a target. And I think we must have gotten permission to do this because then we had some kind of a racket or a bat, and we'd hit balls to try to hit the target over and over and over again, and it would bounce back to us, and then we'd probably miss it and have to go and chase it. But we might have had a badminton racket or a tennis racket. Were you in on that at all?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty well Paul and I. But after that, much later, high school and college for me, I got very interested in tennis and enjoyed playing tennis. But that doesn't, well, maybe it does have a farm connection. I hadn't thought about that. I do remember the next day looking at that side of the stucco, white side of the stucco house, and there were quite a few marks on it. But it seems like we did that several evenings, but I think it came to an end.
You know, we were talking a little bit earlier, and you said that actually the influx of people from the Dust Bowl areas in the country didn't really seem to have a lot of effect on your family, or...
You know, I don't think it had an effect other than in school. You know, there were new kids coming, and I don't know that I specifically heard that so-and-so was from Oklahoma. I don't remember ever hearing that. I remember maybe more so at the junior high level that there began to be a sense of kids that went to Washington Junior High as opposed to kids that went to LSSL Junior High, and it began to have a feeling of like being on the wrong side of the tracks. And
being in the LSL.
Being in the LSL. But I don't remember it, you know, being specifically attributed to that. You know, I didn't have a problem with any of my school friends, and I knew some of the ones from Washington through church. Interesting thing about a piece about LSL, and that's when they built LSSL Junior High School. The first year there was only the front wing, which was 7th grade. So I was in the first class, 7th grade. The next year there was 7th and 8th, the second wing. I was still the top class, and then the third year I was still the top class. And that was the year they built the gymnasium. So a lot of history and you know, yearbooks from that era of time. Wonderful teachers that we had, wonderful memories from junior high, yes.
Did you go into town at all? I mean, shopping?
Oh yeah.
Those things.
Mom and Dad did go into town and shopped at it. It wasn't like people today where they run to the store every day or every other day. You know, Mother had her list and her errands planned out. She would, you know, go by the locker plant, which was in LSL, and take her jacket and go in with her gloves and bring home, you know, meat to the freezer at home from the locker.
It was just called the locker?
I'm trying to remember the
meat
name of the
locker.
street. It was down behind where Bob and Nita lived.
It's down Sanborn, I think.
Right,
Yeah.
I think on Sanborn.
Yeah.
Something about the LSL that I remembered just last night was somewhere between the corner where LSL Elementary School is and my grandparents lived at 415. During the war years, there was a large building that was curved, Quonset hut, and I believe it was a dance hall that was probably used for the servicemen. Not there anymore, but I remember that as a kid. I remember servicemen in the LSL. I don't know if they were actually stationed there by the airport. There were a lot of government buildings, military buildings there in the airport area, and there was, you asked about agriculture. Well, in those years, they were growing rubber plants for the war. Both there and further south toward Chular, they were growing
And
rubber
Spence
plants.
Road.
And Spence Road, yeah. And our grandparents told of a morning that they came out to the kitchen where Grandma would come out and get the trash burner going on the side of her stove to warm the kitchen, and she would be combing her long hair and getting it in the braid and up in the bun. And she came out that morning and there were soldiers asleep on her kitchen floor. Of course, they never locked doors. They never locked doors in those days. And apparently, just got too late and they couldn't find their way back to base or whatever. I mean, there was not any negative thing going on. They just needed shelter for the night, and so they just came on in. So anyway, yeah.
Did your family participate in the war effort at all? I know some kids picked beans, and some people did spotting of airplanes. And
don't remember doing anything like that, other than we had to be very, very careful about pulling the shades at night, darkening shades. I remember those darkening shades.
I don't remember that.
And I do remember the rationing stamps for sugar.
Oh, I remember
and
those.
coffee and those, those kind of food items. That was a big thing. I remember uncle from, not an uncle, but a brother of an uncle from the other side of the family, who must have come home on furlough and came out to the farm for a visit and brought candy, peanut brittle. And that was such a big deal, for us. And I think Uncle Julius would send us from wherever he was stationed, he would send us chewing gum and candy bars. And we would divide a candy bar into 3 pieces.
Oh, I remember 5.
And we never, ever chewed a whole stick of gum.
Never. I still don't. I can't do
Just
it.
didn't do it.
A little self-rationing there.
yeah, ration.
But you mentioned the war effort, and what I remember was the sound of war and the night sight of war coming from Fort Ord. And lots of, well, not lots, but loud noises. I mean, well, sometimes there was more than others. And flares, or worse than flares, shooting up in the air because, well, it's close. And I remember Mom and Dad were, well, everyone was so glad when the war was over, but it got much more quiet, it seemed like, and that was an interruption. But what I remember about the war effort was my mother's wanting to help. And we learned that we had relatives in Denmark. We had cousins over there, and also in Germany. And I remember fixing a care package for Anka.
Yes, I do.
For Anka. And so Mom would get a big box, and we would put clothes in there that we thought that Anka would need. And I'm sure Mom was talking to Grandma Closter about what should go in here. Work clothes and sturdy clothes and warm coats or jackets, and we would get together what we could. And there were problems on the other end, in Germany perhaps, with things being stolen out of the boxes. So Mom would put one shoe in and save the other one for the next mailing to Anka. And then Mom would wrap everything up in brown paper and string, and then Mom would get out a burlap sack and sack twine, and she would tie up the box in burlap and sack twine. I mean, very, very securely. This might have taken an hour or two.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And then, the next time we went to town, it would go to the post office, and we'd get it going in the mail. And I remember a few letters coming from Anka, and then when we got bigger, we didn't hear too much, but I guess in our heart we had to feel like we had helped. Get a pair of shoes there and 2 separate mailings.
It's amazing.
Isn't that something?
Now, you went to Salinas High School, both of you?
Yes.
And what was that like, being that you were from the LSL? Or that's something I did want to ask you. Did you call it the LSL or just LSL?
Oh, LSL.
LSAL.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
LSAL. Well, of course, I went to El Sal too for 4 years after her. I wasn't able to find my yearbooks and bring them, but I absolutely loved my years at El Sal Junior High. I still communicate with one of the teachers. Miss Pauline Gist lives here in town, and I communicated with her every year, and if I'm here for a longer spell than I am this time, I try to get together with her. But she was my foods teacher, and I loved home ec, foods and clothing, and I think it was a goal of our mom that both Sally and I end up to be homemakers, along with being wives and mothers, and so we got some early training both at El Sal and at Salinas High School. And
definitely at home.
yes, and definitely at home, that's right. And but at El Sal, I remember I got involved in leadership. I ran for an office in 7th grade for a second semester, and I didn't win. Kenny Dyson won.
Oh.
But I don't know, I just kind of wanted to be a leader and be on student council, so the next year I ran again and I won, so I was some kind of representative or something. And so my self-esteem was growing. But when I changed and rode the big bus to Salinas Union High School, I was kind of a wallflower. And I don't know if at that time if I connected it with the fact that I was from Alisal or from El Sal Junior High. I don't know. One thing that kind of made me different than the other kids was that I didn't have a telephone. And so not having a telephone in the teen years isolated us. It also made it easier for our parents to keep track of us. Because we were probably home. I was home on Saturday night. And then high school later, you know, I wanted to go to dances and date, but I didn't. But you know, those things come along in life anyway. I started dating when I went to Hartnell. I went there 2 years and got my AA degree. But Sally, you could share a little bit about, well, one more thing I want to say about Salinas High School is I got a terrific academic education there. Yes. I had wonderful teachers, Mrs. Ward and Mrs. Zarnowski for me, and the English literature classes. I learned so much Shakespeare, and I got a lot of groundwork and challenges in writing research papers, and I think I was on the college prep, I guess you call it track, and I was advised or counseled to go that way, and I'm very thankful because I was well prepared to go to college when I went, and so I'm very grateful to my Salinas Union High School teachers. And socially, the other parts of it came along, and so Sally, explain how it went for you.
Well, it was in 7th grade when music was offered, and I had played with my Aunt Christine's old student violin up in the attic at Grandpa and Grandma's house as a little girl, and I'd always kind of had this dream. And then my mom's sister's husband made violins and played violins, so
why don't you tell him his name?
Minor Bolton. And so anyway, in 7th grade I had the opportunity to take orchestra and start learning violin from Mr. Fisk.
Yes.
And that was wonderful. So actually then I stayed in orchestra through my junior year in high school, and the same uncle and aunt provided private lessons for me, which was awesome. They also saw to it that that I got to community concerts. They would come clear out to the farm, pick me up and take me. And so I was introduced to international type music, both vocal and instrumental, at a very high level, and right there in the high school auditorium, and one time in Carmel. So that was very broadening for me.
Who was your teacher?
In high school?
Yeah, you said they got you private lessons.
Do you know, I can't remember the gentleman's name, didn't live too far from here, who taught me private lessons. And of course, you know, there was always this struggle because I was so busy working on the farm, and by then I had steers in 4-H to get ready for the fair. There were chores, and then we lost a lot of time because we were on the bus, right? We lost time on the bus. So I never felt like I really did lessons justice because I didn't really put in the practice time. And but that was an enjoyable exposure to music, was wonderful. And I also took home economics, both at Elsasel and in high school, and that served me well. High school was, you know, it was a great experience even without a telephone. I had a close friend on a farm not too far. By then my parents had saved enough and they purchased a farm called Quail Creek Ranch, which is on Old Stage Road toward Chular, not all the way to Chular, which that farm in itself has a lot of local history. Actually had been owned by people with money and had a polo field and awesome stables, and of course my daddy bought it for the acreage and growing crops, but you know, I benefited because I had the steers for 4-H, and then I did have a horse for a few years, which was awesome.
Dolly.
Dolly, yes.
Dolly was wonderful.
Yes, so that was, but I only lived there about 4 years, from Southbourne High School through Hartnell, 1 year in Hartnell. So most of my memories are from Williams Road.